1980. That's the beginning of that wave. So that first wave are beginning to enter their late 20s and will start turning their early 30s. So what Shirley in Edmonton pointed out was she sees a growth in the number of strollers on the street. And why is that? Because you have this young adult population who's choosing to live in downtown or city centers. They're now starting to have children, and then they buy these super, equipped strollers that, do everything for the kid. It has a massage unit, and it has a self-feeding unit. I mean, these strollers are like, Cadillacs. But from your company's perspective, while you're thinking about the vans and the paratransit units to be able to put a wheelchair in, over the next decade, you're going to see a growth in the number of people who are having children, because there's just going to be that many more of them, and they're going to be wanting taxi service to be able to accommodate these vehicles, these strollers. Just a way to think differently about demographics and the changes in the ways in which these trends may impact your industry, and also how they're going to affect transportation. So nightlife and transportation really has multiple goals, which I'm going to talk about, and then transportation systems, and give you just a few examples or case studies. So the goals of transportation for nightlife is essentially to help reduce alcohol-related crashes, increase pedestrian safety, increase opportunities to intervene, make the zone more safer and more efficient. You want to lower car usage and traffic congestion as part of the whole sustainability, air pollution, and you want to maximize the access to existing transport systems. From a development point of view, this would enhance the ability of people to take advantage of the retail shopping and commercial space and the social opportunities that you create for them. It could generate more public traffic and more spending. It could spur commerce. It could be a destination for tourism and conventions and people who are coming to live or move their businesses into downtown districts. And it also is a way to provide better transport to the employees. Now, traffic fatalities are really one of the key elements to late night transportation because they're often involving alcohol, and they're most likely often involving those people under 30, as this chart shows. And as people get older, they're less likely to be involved in accidents, particularly alcohol-related accidents. And the profile of people involved is, again, weekends and nights and other areas where, from a perspective of your industry being a part of a social fabric of creating a safe environment, it's important to understand that your role is vital and critical to helping to save the lives of people. In addition, older residents are retiring in culture centers. Go to the entertainment district here in Toronto, where they have the theaters and the stadiums, and see all the condos that are being built in and near this downtown district, because that's where people want to live. They want to be able to walk out their door and be able to go to restaurants, and they want to be able to go to the theater. They want to be able to meet people. They want to people watch. They want that vibrancy of a district. Many people are moving into college communities when they retire because there's access to that culture. You have the urban dwellers who need better transit within the zone, and then you have the suburbanites who are coming into the zone because of all of these social opportunities. You have restaurants that rely on public transit for their first round of seating, but oftentimes that public transit doesn't exist after a certain period of time, so they need alternative transportation systems which you can provide to get them to where they need to go. College communities in particular have higher risk and greater need for some form of alternate transportation at night, just because of the nature of the time frame and the lifestyle in which people socialize. So when we think about ways in which people who are in a nightlife district can access or be facilitated to access the services that you provide, there are many points of marketing potential contact, ways in which you can facilitate either access to use public transit or access to use the for-hire transit or access to use the taxi system. But regardless, all of these forces can come together to recognize when somebody needs a ride and be able to get that ride from your industry. So mobility management, which is a term I heard actually from your keynote speaker the first day from the American Public Transportation Association, this idea of mobility management is an approach to service that focuses on individual customer markets, which is what I'm trying to point out. You have to segment your markets based upon demographics and the lifestyles of those demographics and what their needs are based upon their activities, and establish a variety of services to meet those market needs. And it involves a responsibility for establishing a coordinated service delivery network to achieve connectivity. And that's the one thing I appreciate about Matt when I first met him, and his commitment to make sure that in any regional transit planning system that the taxi industry is at the table. Because again, it's not often at the table. And then mobility management encompasses the design and management of the transportation infrastructure. So these are elements of nightlife and mobility management, and these are areas that you have to focus in on. The patrons that arrive by transit, the people who work in the hospitality businesses, night workers who work in shipping services or hospitals or nighttime store maintenance or office maintenance. There's a lot of people who work in the nighttime economy, often at low wages, who don't necessarily have the same access to public transportation that the daytime workers have. And so we have this barrier to thinking about the nighttime economy as something that we as a community need to service. Parking systems, and we have Sean Conrad, who's the president of the International Parking Institute, on our next webinar, is really a link in the transportation system, particularly as we're starting to work with cities where they're trying to create more concentrated taxi service in the nightlife venues. You have to have interaction with the parking systems in order to facilitate the opportunity for the queuing of the transportation systems. Another kind of emerging issue that I don't know how it relates to your industry, but the pedicab issue is really heating up in cities. We get calls periodically. We have the president of the company out of the Boulder area who manufactures pedicabs. He'll be on a webinar talking about the trends in the industry and the ways in which cities are beginning to regulate. And my question to those of you who are regulators, where does the pedicab fit into the taxi industry? And how do you integrate the licensing and insurance and regulations of that segment? Last night when I was walking home, I saw probably 8 or 9 pedicabs just riding around the streets. Late night public transit, looking at how many people could potentially use public transit. Edmonton did an interesting pedestrian study and monitored pedestrian crossings at a key crosswalk at noon and 1 p.m. and 2 p.m. and did the same study at midnight, 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. And they found that 2 times as many people crossed that same street after midnight as during the peak commercial period during the day. But the services to facilitate and accommodate that increased number of people doesn't exist at night. Usually it's only the police who work at night, and they're the only ones who are responsible for managing it. So how do you figure out where people are coming from? You know, when I'm 25 years old, I have a certain income, I'm going to live in an area where I can afford. And so if you're smart, you can, not smart, but if you're strategic, you can begin to document where people who are patronizing the nightlife venues live and where they're coming from. So you don't need a whole system, citywide system. you may just need some corridor routes that are limited to key markets, and maybe utilize smaller vehicles. And then obviously the individual service with the taxi industry and the drivers, the shuttles, the ride home stands or taxi ranks with location security, expediters, and comfort stations. That's one of those things that is taken for granted, that when you drive a cab for 8 hours, somehow or another you're going to have some place to pee, you know? How do we accommodate some of the needs of the people who work in this economy? Safety, soft closing, which is what some cities are beginning to do, and that is to stagger the times in which people in clubs are let out. And this facilitates the cab service to have multiple routes to pick up and move patrons. And then finally, the marketing of these services. So I'm going to focus in on 4 cities that 3 of whom we've worked with, one of which I met last year, Blair, who participated in a webinar, and so he's going to come up and help me if I get anything wrong. Boulder, Colorado is a college community, and it has a college on the hill. And when people started to move into the area surrounding the college, and there were a lot of bars, they decided they didn't want those bars, and so they got the city to close them down, which meant that the students had to go down to Pearl Street, which is the downtown pedestrian district, which led to a lot of new bars and entertainment venues opening up. But at closing time, the students had a choice, either to wait for the limited number of cabs, to wait for a shuttle that only ran every half hour, or to walk up the hill back to their dormitories or their fraternity houses through the neighborhoods, which totally disrupted the peace and quality of life of the residents. So they complained and they wanted to do something about it. And then if a cab came, some people were drunk and they fought over who was to get into the cab. So they needed more police. So the police costs started to go up. So they said, what can we do about this? And so they got a group of stakeholders together. We were funded by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to work with Boulder, and came up with an extended schedule that the university, because the students pay fees for the transportation, the HOP system, it's a free service that runs throughout the day that's supported by student fees, that they would extend the schedule, and in order to maintain order on the bus, they had police ride on the bus, and they developed a social marketing campaign called Abuse It or Lose It. This way, they kind of educated the people who were using the bus that if they continued to misbehave, they would lose that resource. And the outcome is that they now continue this service on Thursday and Friday and Saturday nights. They've extended the service to run every 10 minutes instead of every 30 minutes until 3 a.m. They've had a 32% increase in ridership. They average about 500 riders per night. And they've actually recognized the need to have special drivers who can deal with drunk college students, you know, at 2 o'clock in the morning. So there's a certain personality type that you have to find to be a driver in this particular situation. Seattle is another city. In fact, it was one of 4 pilot cities that we worked with in 2003. And they put together an 8-point initiative, a nightlife initiative that the new mayor undertook as one of his campaigns, principally because the nightlife industry lobbied to get him elected. But it's really an evolution of recognizing that Seattle's economy is one that's based upon high-tech, biotech, entertainment, music, film production, and that the worker's schedule is no longer your traditional worker schedule. And as a tourist destination, you have people coming from Asia